India's ambition of boosting its manufacturing sector to an all-time high of 25% of GDP and growing at 9% a year on a sustained basis to become a $5 trillion economy depends substantially on the infrastructure sector. Being the key driver for the Indian economy, the government has sharply increased the outlay for capital expenditure by 35.4% for FY23. BTTV's associate editor Chetan Bhutani spoke to leading voices in the infrastructure space and discussed how can the enhanced focus on infra meet with timely execution of projects.
Well, hello and a very warm welcome to BT Brainstorm 2022, a Business Today event to discuss all matters economy and business. I am Chetan Bhutani, and with me, a stellar panel with me today, Ms. Dakshita Das, former Additional Member Finance, Ministry of Railways, Mr. P.R. Jaishankar, Managing Director of India Infrastructure Finance Company Limited, Mr. Vijay Chibbar, DG Electric Power Transmission Association and former Secretary to the Government of India, and Vaibhav Dange, expert on infrastructure and public policy. Thank you all for speaking to us on this BT's Brainstorm 2022. My first question to Ms. Das. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us on BT Brainstorm. Ma'am, how does the increased CAPEX contribute, especially in the terms of contribution to the transport sector to GDP in India?
So infra spending is extremely important because it significantly boosts the GDP. India has been hovering around 3 to 4%, and recent past it has come down. So in that sense, it's very critical, the kind of CAPEX which is envisaged, because when the economy is being tweaked towards the supply side, it's very important that the infrastructure copes up with the higher production values. And this in particular has a bearing on the transport sector, that is both railways, roads, as well as your airspace. So in a very limited sense, the transport GDP, which has been hovering around 6%, the main contributor to that is the highway sector, where aggressively and significantly there has been a rapid expansion. So I think we are on the right track, because since we have seen in the COVID times that a lot of emphasis has gone on supply side, logically the infra space also has to expand to take care of the process part.
Right. Well, absolutely. Well, Mr. Chibbar, the next one to you. Highway sector saw a record allocation, but the devil lies in the detail when I say this, because NHAI's borrowing has literally reduced substantially. So if NHAI is not allowed to raise funds, and do you think that the allocation from the budget, the toll money, and of course the highway monetization would be enough for 25,000 kilometer target that the government has set?
So I think let me start by complimenting the government for its continued focus on infrastructure, because it's not just platitudes, but there is money where the mouth is. And particularly for railways and roads, I think the allocations have seen a substantial step up. But I take you back to the National Infrastructure Pipeline, which is the grand design, and which requires a humongous amount of investments. Now, if you see the grand design itself, almost 50% or a little above 50% of the money is envisaged to come from the private sector. So while it's correct that your focus is on the budget and the budget figures and the allocations per se, it's really the private sector which is required to kick in. And I think the focus really should be on what is it that we need to do more or further to ensure that private capital comes in. As regards your specific query regarding the allocations for the road sector, I think that's a huge step up. I mean, you can't always wish that the taxpayer would bankroll the entire thing. And monetization program, which is again a very big, large program, is something that can easily roll out in the road sector because projects are already complete. I think we should be looking at the TOT model very, very aggressively. This experiment at doing an InvIT and then calling it my InvIT. InvITs by definition are nobody's InvITs. They are an animal. They are a trust to hold assets. And if we are serious about monetization, I think we should go whole hog on the TOT. And I think NHAI is well equipped. The only caution here would be that you should give enough time to prospective bidders to do their due diligence. There's no point bringing in projects with 2 months notice, 3 months notice. certainly foreign capital will not jump in with such short windows.
Well, absolutely, sir. In fact, Mr. Gadkari also pointed out the same thing, that you can't expect the taxman to do everything. Mr. Jaishankar, IFCL saw highest ever disbursements with respect to, and of course, sanctions, of course, 20,000 crore rupees and 9,000 crore rupees respectively. Don't you think that with the increased focus on CAPEX, is there a need for IFCL also to spend more or probably lend more?
Well, the fact that infrastructure sector has compounding effect on the growth and development of any economy is not new. We know that it has its backward and forward linkages. And the CAPEX expenditure in the budget also, if I have to, refer to the budget, it has been raised by 35% from 5.5 lakh crores to 7.5 lakh crores. So IIFCL is an arm of the government, and we are the apex institution to lend to infrastructure sector. Yes, we have seen, despite the COVID and the pandemic times, the sector, we have been able to kind of show a remarkable growth even during this crucial time. Though, of course, I would have been happier with higher levels. But looking at it, we need to do a little more, right? I agree with you on that. As far as the overall demand is concerned, it's quite picking up, and we are seeing some projects getting back to its shape, what it was in the last 2 years. And I'm sure in the coming 6-7 months, everything should be back. And already we are seeing the road sector and a few other sectors, the revenue situations are in the pre-COVID, as it was in the pre-COVID days. So as it gets back to the normalcy, I'm sure the offtake, the credit offtake also will grow. And I can also say this on behalf of the bankers as well, banking sector, not just IIFCL, because IIFCL lends as a part of consortium of banks, and the entire banking sector would definitely see a better offtake in the coming days.
Right, sir. Mr. Dange, with National Infrastructure Pipeline and of course the PM Gati Shakti being officially the roadmap being rolled out, how can India's infra development endeavors come to timeline with respect to completely achieving the targets with respect to the timeline? The timeline, the implementation timeline is very important as far as the infra project goes. So how do you think with these two coming in and integrating the infra endeavors of the government, what needs to be done really to completely execute the projects on time?
I think in the budget, finance minister also suggested, and there has been a clear indication from last more than 1 year from the government, program like PM Gati Shakti with Honorable Prime Minister launch himself, primarily talks about increasing cooperation and coordination between the ministries. For example, finance minister suggested for a clearance, a common digital platform in the name of Parivesh, where clearances can be, done at a much faster pace than, these are the normal bottlenecks which we see into the infrastructure projects, whether it is highways, railways, or, common bottlenecks. I think PM Gati Shakti and a focus on the overall infrastructure with a multimodal approach, I think is a key takeaway of this year's budget. So I'm completely convinced that with that focus, implementation can take a good pace. In fact, highway has shown it. A lot of other sectors have shown it. For example, railways, electrification in last 3 years, numbers are much startling than probably they were in last 15-20 years. So infrastructure is increasing at much faster pace. Not only highways, for example, metro. 10 years back, we were looking at only metros in 2 to 3 cities. Today we have 17 cities. They were talking about completion of phase 1, phase 2 of metros, and expanding the reach further. Same is happening in the airport sector. We have now 136 airport that are being completed. So I think the focus, of course, is on implementation. And I would also credit Finance Minister that she has focused on continuing that growth this year by focusing on infrastructure, because close to 24th election, she will not have that leverage to probably focus on increasing the capital expenditure. In spite of there is a stress of COVID from last 2 years, and of course there is a fiscal stress on every finance minister. So looking at that, keeping that focus on, I think is very important, and that clearly is the message from the budget.
Right, sir. Ms. Das, I'll come to you now. What are the probable game changers? Because I asked this question because railway especially has a social obligation to carry the people of the country, length and breadth of the country. So, what are the probable game changes envisaged that can be done by the railways to boost CAPEX further?
So there's a very different model which operates in the railways as opposed to the highways. In highways, the government has done well, and Sir was there, Vaibhavji was there. What they've done is they've laid the legislative framework for a tariff sharing a model between the promoter and the user. And there is a regular process by which both the maintenance as well as the increase in this happens. Railways is, however, carrying a large mix, which is its passenger operations is a largely subsidized area, which becomes a loss making. However, despite that, what the railways has been able to ensure is that its freight operations somehow are able to cover the gap which exists as far as the passenger operations are concerned. But that's not important. What's significant is some of the changes which the railways is seeing. You're seeing the Vande Bharat technology coming in, which is going to be very big. You're going to see the new kind of signaling, the TCAS technology, which is also going to be a game changer. So you have lightweight, speedier trains. And the Honorable Railway Minister very recently, I read somewhere, has announced that in order to boost the speed, all you need is perhaps looking at a different way of having elevated tracks. The point I'm making is that while railway continues to carry its social service obligations, at one level its constraint comes because of the paths. You see, unlike the highways where the movement can be seamless, and perhaps the jams which you see will only be at toll plazas, and even less now due to the automated toll system. What is happening in the railways is that you have a mix of traffic, but the dedicated freight corridor, which is shortly to be cleaned up, and completed, the Vande Bharat, as well as a couple of other technological changes are going to make it a leaner and, let's say, a faster organization. And as Vaibhav has said, all of that is targeted to be done within a very limited time span because of 2024 coming.
Right. Ma'am, one more question to you, that the healthy PPPs, and same goes for everybody on the panel, please feel free to come in. The healthy PPPs and implementation, successful implementation of special purpose vehicles, I think are the need for faster implementation of PPP projects, and especially any infrastructure project, greenfield or brownfield. So, ma'am, or Vijay sir, or Mr. Jaishankar, Mr. Dange, please feel free to come in. Do we really think that PPP needs to also make a comeback along with SPVs?
We have had a very healthy relationship with the SPVs in the railways. And some of the biggest success stories came in Gujarat, in the south, where the SPV model worked very well. There'll always be one bad case, but that doesn't say that there is no comfort with the others. But as far as PPP is concerned, I'm personally of the view, because I've worked in both ministries, that the road sector is very comfortable with PPP. But I'll leave that for other panelists to elaborate upon.
Mr. Chibbar, I still very well remember while covering the ministry, you had actually been a big focus of PPP players as well, PPP model, but due to the lack of private participation, you were the one who probably kicked off the other models because, of course, the road construction cannot wait. So, but you think it's now time for PPPs and SPVs to come back?
Certainly, most certainly. There was a crisis around 13-14, which we had to get out of, and therefore government spend had to be increased. And if you recall, very quickly thereafter, we brought in the hybrid annuity model, where the government spend came down to 40%. And So my way of looking at this is as follows. The hybrid annuity actually is a model which is tailor-made for the banking sector. It is absolutely taking on board all the concerns of the banking sector. And there was a doubt at that point in time, but I'm so glad that the entire banking fraternity has now owned up the hybrid model as something which is very suitable and very appropriate. It sends all the right signals. In PPP, the question is about sending the right signals. And I think we have now matured in the hybrid annuity. We should put in more and more projects into hybrid annuity and correspondingly bring back BOT toll in some manner. But I think Mrs. Das said something very interesting, and if you will indulge me for 1 minute, I will take you to another sector, because she said the legal framework is ready, the regulatory framework in the road sector has matured, and therefore you can respond to the situation as it emerges. Today, the banking sector is more comfortable, the construction industry has matured, and yes, certainly PPP should be brought back. But I'll take you to another sector of another vertical of the infrastructure, which actually lends itself completely to private investment. And this is the transmission space in the power sector. And I'm wearing one of the hats where I look into that. And where the policy framework right from 2003, the Electricity Act of 2003, that talks about competition in the transmission space. The National Electricity Policy, which was notified in 2006, it clearly says, considering the magnitude of the expansion of the sector required, a sizable part of the investments will need to be brought in from the private sector. Take it forward to Transmission Policy of 16. It says the tariff of all new generation and transmission projects in the central sector shall continue to be determined on the basis of competitive bidding as per the tariff policy notified in 2006. It goes on further to say that further intrastate transmission projects shall be developed by state governments through competitive bidding. This is 2016. So what is the actual position on ground? If I share some data with you, you would be aghast. The spend on interstate transmission from 2013 to 21, we had 231 projects, of which 161 went to PGCIL on a nomination route, whereas only 70 were bid out through the competitive bidding route. Even out of this 70 which were bid out, PGCIL, which is a strong PSU, we are fortunate that in transmission space, we have a PSU which is fully functional. It is the big boy in the field. It was able to capture 33% of the projects even which were bid out. And this is a good sign. But let me take it forward. For the period 22 to 24, we are envisaging an investment of about 105 lakh crores. About 27,000 in the state sector and the rest in the central sector. Only 11% of this spend is coming through the competitive route. Now, going back to my difficulty is that here is a sector with a policy which clearly says we must go through the transparent bidding route, and the actual empirical evidence tells you you're going absolutely in the opposite side. What is the benefit of competition? Let me just spell it out in 30 seconds. One is we have empirical evidence to show that projects rolled out on competition have been achieving a tariff lower than the nomination route, but to the extent of 45%, range of 25 to 45%. Tariff is a pass-through. That is, the consumers, that is the people of India, are paying for the higher tariff. Competition brings in not only lower tariffs, but it also brings in best technology, including through PGCIL. I am not saying that best technology is only coming from the private sector, but here is a space where even the public sector unit is capable of bringing in technology. So why don't you go down that route?
Right, Mr. Chimber, would you? So basically, India, as you mentioned, that India has this transmission policy. Any particular clauses in the policy that you would like to highlight in particular that is probably disturbing the transmission operators?
Yeah. So no, it's not clauses. It's the lack of transparency in the way forward.
Okay.
It's the signal. As I said, in PPP, it's the signal. If you signal to the market that we will do pick and choose, and there is no transparency in which of the next projects will be brought into the market and which will be rolled out through a nomination route, the private sector says, why am I going into this vertical? Today, we have about 12 very healthy, large houses which have come into transmission space, but are beginning to doubt whether they should continue to work in this and happily move on to some other space where they are more welcomed. Why I'm signaling this particular vertical is that here is a vertical better than any other infra vertical for inviting in private sector. The entire spend can be done through private sector investments, the entire spend. Whereas in other sectors, including roads, we have certain challenges in saying that all the projects can be taken up through PPP. The point is, we have a grand design. We have agreed that bulk of the money will come from private sector. But the signals going out into the market through this one vertical are vitiating the entire welcoming approach that I think the PM sought to roll out when he rolled out the Gati Shakti program.
The success of PPP model, as Mr. Chibar said, will ultimately lie in the dynamism of that PPP model that is done both from the private sector and on the government regulatory front. Mr. Chibar and Ms. Das both were in the Road Highways Ministry, and the biggest probably signal, as Mr. Chibar said, has been the competitiveness that has been brought into the whole highway sector, the kind of approachability that has brought to the highway sector, the kind of problem solving attitude that has come to the highway sector. I remember there are so many cabinet amendments that were done to look after the challenges that contract throws in, including the challenges banks are facing. For example, HAM model.
Even the exit policy for that matter.
Correct. So HAM model was evolved based on the challenges that were faced by the private sector, bankers and the government. So I think that continuous evolving is very much required. In fact, last year, if I'm not wrong, there are 4 BOT projects which highway sector has rolled out. So as all the panelists has rightly said, the success of PPP will ultimately lie in partnership, not being a regulatory agency and a private sector. So unless that framework change, that attitude change, it's a partnership between government and a private sector. So they both are on an equal platform. Probably that equal platform is still missing in most of the sector.
I completely agree that, the way forward for, ensuring that our economy gets into the next scale of growth. If we have to look at the scaling of our growth, we need to ensure private investments flow in a very, very, there has to be animal spirits. I think if that has to be brought in, we need to bring that level of confidence in the private sector. That's what the signals that need to be put into the PPP framework that needs to build that confidence, because infrastructure projects, if I may say, are generational. They see more than 3-4 generations, and they've seen more than 4 to 5 governments also pass through. They look at a single infrastructure project. So if we need to look at, the way in which the contract provisions are honored, the way in which the redressal mechanisms are addressed, and it's not just about the highway. The highway and roads are just leading the route, because the first PPP projects were ushered in the road sector. There has been a lot of learnings. There's been the Kelkar committee, and now the HAM model was also ushered in to ensure the investments continue to flow and government continue to pedal the infrastructure growth. Now is a time, perhaps, for ensuring that sort of uniformity is what about in the PPP context, so that it's just not about roads, but also other sectors which can use this model very well. And it's not just about getting looking at concessions. Concessions is just one part. We need to perhaps look at other countries which have had this development in a more transparent and more consistent manner, And more than rules, I think it's time, very high time for India to have a PPP law or infrastructure law, which can ensure that the interests of all the parties, including the public sector, private sector, bankers, and all the other service providers involved, all are the interests of all these stakeholders are looked after, not just over a period of 5 to 10 years, but over a period of time till the infrastructure life cycle, the project life cycle is there.
Right, Mr. Jaishankar, I think that's a very valid point that India, I think, needs a comprehensive PPP policy across all the sectors. But the onus also lies on you, because if we want private sectors to spend more, I think charity begins at home. And I think there's a need for IFCL as a government of India's undertaking to start spending more. So
Right.
Are you taking more measures with respect to lending more?
Yes. In fact, the avenues for lending has now, the scope for lending is now being expanded. We have a reasonable. Earlier we used to have a very closed and very small channel of lending environment, but now over a period of time, there's been a reasonable development as far as the brownfield and completed projects are concerned. We have a number of other instruments. We have the InvITs, we have the infrastructure development funds, and we have the takeout financing, credit enhancements, and the bond market is also quite reasonably active in this segment. Now, what is necessary is, the same kind of development has to take place in the greenfield environment, for which, we need to ensure that the real sector issues which we talked about, be it the land acquisitions or be it the approvals or the contract issues and the legal issues, those are also solved by a very transparent and very consistent policy framework. So I think on the whole, not only IFCL, I think it's the entire banking environment, and it's
Yes, absolutely.
The financial environment which needs to look at this. The bond market should play a more active role in future. And IIFCL has already started its foray into the bond market. We have already started investing in bonds of infrastructure projects, so that the new architecture what we have been talking about, that is the greenfield investments being financed by the banks and financial institutions according to their liability profiles, 5 to 7 years, can be well supplemented by the bond market after they exit after 5 to 7 years, by adding a tenor of 15 to 20 years in the completed projects. So there we have started our foray, and we are very active in that front. And overall, this new architecture will only help the infrastructure projects in terms of better, longer tenor. And longer tenor means, better project viability, and ultimately better user charges, and which helps the economy in the long run.
Yes, Mr. Dangi, you wanted to step in?
Yeah, I think, of course, I must congratulate Mr. Jaishankar, because IIFCL has been at the forefront of financing the infrastructure sector, and they have been doing a remarkable work in the last 2-3 years, particularly in the highway and other projects. But I think I remember a meeting of lenders happening in Mumbai, where SBI CMD said he is more happy to fund NHAI or the government per se for the highway sector, even 1 lakh crore, than financing the developers, concessionaire who are coming in. So I think that, again, I will come to that attitudinal changes required in the sector. For example, like government is looking at monetizing its assets. Banks, financial institutions will also have to be more dynamic and more proactive in looking at how do their assets can be churned more and more, because globally churning the assets is the key in long term for raising more finances and attracting more new instruments. For example, the government had to come in with the new instrument through the insurance instead of BGs, because getting BGs from financial institutions, bank, has been a big pain for the concessionaires and the developers. So I think overall, if the infrastructure ecosystem has to work, probably institutions like IFCL and the financial institutions will have to be also more dynamic in terms of how they handle the infrastructure project. So I think that is one area where a financial institution needs to be more looking at how do they develop more dynamism.
The relay financing and what we have been talking about, how one set of banks or one set of lenders can transmit the asset to another set of, because world over, the liability profiles of banks are limited, and because of the sources of funds being the tax, the savers surplus. So I think, we need to look at how one set of lenders, transmit the asset to the other set of lenders. And world over, that's what happens. And the channel tunnel, I have been talking about that. 99 years, concession and 203 banks over a period of 99 years. So we need to look at those type of issues. And we need to see how best.
Sorry, I'll interject you quickly because a very similar kind of a doubt I have is that majority of funds for infrastructure come from banks, used to come from banks actually. Now what's happened is, I think the NBFCs and infra financing companies are playing a major role in that. Don't you think, or Mr. Chibber and Ms. Das and Mr. Dangi, don't you think that the banks should also play a key role in lending? Because the amount of money that the banks can lend, I'm sure they have a bigger appetite for that. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the bank should also play a key role with respect to lending.
So if sir, if you permit me, we've seen a very interesting change in the bank's perception. See, we've had a lot of cleanup which this government has done as far as the bank's balance sheets are concerned, and a lot of problems which due to, we know what happened in 2018 when 2-3 very systemically important institutions had a problem. Now, what's important here is not per se the approach of the banks or of the lenders, but it's actually the cost of capital. Whatever is cheaper is going to be picked up because these are market forces. I mean, if Mr. Jaishankar is going to give me money lower than, say, what you're going to give Chetan, that's where I'm going to go. Because eventually we all have to take care of the cost of capital. But what's very interesting is that, which is what I come back to my first point, that a lot of decisions have happened. And in that sense, I'll say that the highway sector has shown the way, like what Webb have mentioned about that insurance product. I think it's revolutionary. Now, today there might be a reluctance to adopt these things, but tomorrow the change will come. So Chetan, there has been a lot of mindset changes. Even when HAM came in the beginning, I think there was a lot of dialogue which needed to happen to bring acceptability to it. It's established. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not very difficult because the changes have already happened. But what will determine is the cost of capital. It's not going to be so much the lending agency as much as the cost of capital to the borrowing agents. So,
Mr. Chibber?
I think the last 1 year has seen a complete sea change. A year back, for a variety of reasons, the banking community was also constrained. They were a little tight-fisted in taking bold decisions. I find today that atmosphere has completely changed. I'm still associated with a few construction companies. I find none of their projects are being held up because of lack of financing. At the back of the mind of the Indian banking sector is also the fact that several foreign funds for the first time have apportioned a part of their global annual allocations for investments into India. It's like a war chest being created and targeted for a country. This is a very, very healthy and a dynamic kind of a situation. It means that those funds have, over time, analyzed that with all its warts and all the difficulties and challenges, the return on investment in the Indian market is still better than what they're getting in other geographies. It's a huge positive, despite all the inherent problems that we as practitioners in this space of infrastructure build are ourselves aware of. I am quite sanguine that going forward, I think the banking sector also has now realized that the rewards are very, very high. There is a need to take decisions quickly. Otherwise, the project proponents are not having are having alternative choices. So, I think there's money now following the projects very, very closely. It's also a recognition of the fact that the MCAs have also matured, and the concerns of the lenders and the banking sector have by and large been addressed. In the case of projects which are still in litigation, and I find that the lenders again are taking a very, very positive approach. They are recognizing the fact that government is taking an extra step forward to try and achieve conciliation where it is possible. I think the road sector is again a leader in that space. And other verticals can take a cue from the road sector in trying to find ways to resolve issues so that the lenders do not feel that they are left on their own
Right.
to recover the bad debts.
Absolutely. In fact, Mr. Dangi, this was the point I was trying to make to you as well. Ms. Das has also been associated with the Debt Recovery Tribunal very closely. And of course, the road sector had that Sarod for affordable resolution. My quick question to Mr. Dange is the fact that the private investors, the lenders definitely have a worry of taking large haircuts post if any company goes into bankruptcy or insolvency, or probably the money gets stuck. How do we improve this regulation and give a good signal to the lenders, to the private players, that yes, if you put in your money, it will not. We'll try our best to do a good job and not let the money lose.
No, absolutely. In fact, almost on every global forum wherever I have attended, particularly on the infrastructure, the biggest point everybody has been making is about dispute resolution mechanisms in the infrastructure. And globally, I completely agree that it's an evolving process. It's a very dynamic process. But as I said, the whole approach has to be of the partnership level, because here private sector is a partner to the government sector for developing projects. So it cannot be a kind of a high-handed approach. And I think in last 3-4 years, much development has happened in terms of, for example, as you said about highway sector, the dispute resolution mechanism through Sarod and conciliation mechanisms, and similar methodologies have been adopted by banks. The NCLT model has been equally successful. So I think I completely agree that unless we have a better mechanism where disputes are, as Mr. Jaishankar said, redressal mechanisms, funding institutions, whether it is bank or the foreign funds or anybody for that matter, will hesitate to invest money into the Indian infrastructure sector. And we have seen that, for example, a National Infrastructure Fund, which was formed in 2015, it took a couple of years for that fund to actually took off and get some investment from the global funds, because there had been a hesitation about developing that mechanism which will ensure that all stakeholders' interest is taken care of, and there is a approach to resolve those issues quickly, time bound. So I think that is absolutely required, and it's not a kind of a black and white line. We'll have to continuously evolve those. Therefore, I think evolving contract is also equally important. Contracts are also dynamic. They need to be, amended, evolved with the learnings every year of implementing the projects, the feedback from the financial institutions, bankers, that complete put together. I think that mechanisms need to be developed, and unless we create that confidence among all stakeholders that their interest is equally important, everybody's interest is equally important, and is important in the larger interest of the project.
Mr. Jaishankar, quickly coming on to Mr. Dange's point, what needs to be really done for you, because you are amongst the panel who's giving out money. So what needs to be done so that you feel more comfortable and secure?
Well, I have already indicated about the law, but that might be a long-term or a medium-term, issue. Immediately in the short run, I think we would be happy if a tripartite arrangement is there as far as the concessions are concerned, because they are now more bipartite in nature, and lenders have a very huge stake of about 70% in the entire project cost. So I think that is one thing which we have been, talking to the government also about. Other than that, in the financial regulations, there needs to be a review, because the way in which the asset classification is looked at by the regulator today, I think that needs a review, and we need to look at how internationally it is addressed, because the way in which we are looking at long-term finance today to be supplemented by one institution or a set of institutions will never happen. It never happens anywhere in the world also. It can't, because the sourcing of funds everywhere is limited. Even in the multilaterals, it is limited to 25 years. And we are looking at, 50 years and 60 years, if we have to look at complex mega projects. If that has to, be made possible, we need to look at regulation which actually does not disincentivize restructuring as standard assets are concerned. So I think that is something which is very important, and the Reserve Bank of India should take cue on that.
Right. Absolutely, sir. I totally agreed. Before I wrap up, last 30 seconds each to Mr. Chibbar and Ms. Das, that how about spending? First of all, to Ms. Das, ma'am, Railways has a problem of not spending properly, I believe, because we've been doing a lot of reporting and some study on that. How do we solve that problem out? Yes, money is being given out by the government, by the banks. The problem is, I think, with the railways is to spend. Any word on that, ma'am?
So absorptive capacity is what you're talking about.
Yes, ma'am. Absorptive capacity. Yes.
Now the thing is that railways projects are long lead. They are, unlike the highway sector, railway, although they have land, they have a big advantage because they already, most of them are brownfield and they have land. The problem is that in railways, the initial sluggishness comes in the first couple of years. And after that, the projects take off. And I think a lot of activity has happened to clean up the norms and the regulatory framework, which ensures that the projects speeden up. And we've also now got new announcements where projects are being monitored at the CAPEX level. I personally believe that a set of what Railways has done, and I have knowledge of that, is that they handpick some very critically important projects, which they ensure are monitored till they're completed. Then they pick up another lot, because there are so many projects. I mean, it's got a developmental book which runs into 2 volumes, and that's the large number of projects Railway has. So what they're doing is that they're picking up core projects which are important in terms of boosting the growth of the economy. And that's very, very important, because the moment they are completed, you start getting revenues from that and you move into the next lot. So the absorptive capacity problem is something which is a cyclical thing. The first period is in any case sluggish.
Right. Mr. Chibbar?
So I'll take you to another aspect I think we have not covered, which is renewables, because that is also infrastructure space where government is huge targets and PM's personal commitment. Renewables, basically solar and wind, they are coming up in geographies which are not integrated already with the national grid. So you can have a huge amount of, and it's all being built by private sector. You can have a huge amount of investment and targets being met in the renewable space, but if you do not correspondingly build the transmission capacities to link these new generating projects to the national grid, you will be failing in achieving your targets. And therefore, I take you back to the transmission space. India is a complete outlier in trying to build this transmission infrastructure on a nomination route, a route which is opaque, it is inefficient, it is high cost. It is sending all the wrong signals in the market. And my fear is that we might jeopardize our wonderful focus on renewables if we do not correct the mistakes we are making in the transmission space.
Well, I think the last point that you made on the renewable space, I think, and especially the data, with the data that you put in, I think there's a separate need for having a discussion on a larger macroeconomic basis for renewable energy, because I think, yes, they need to be connected to the national grid. We're completely out of time here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the BT Brainstorm 2022. Looking forward to see you all again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.